Hello, welcome to another session of sustainable economics, sustainable development. The chapter 9, is entitled Economic Sustainability or Sustainability of Economic Sustainability. Unfortunately, I don't think really it has much to do with sustainability, so it's really an attempt only to present a very basic primer for those who have forgotten their economics, or to just provide others with a little bit of knowledge about the mainstream economics, so that we'll be able to say a few more words about economic sustainability in the next chapter, or at least some of the issues. Let me try and compress the whole chapter into a few ideas. Really, essentially, you've got to remember that all of economics is essentially built on the ideas that were developed by the classicals. And in essence, really, we always go back to Smith. The most popular conception, or the most popular model, that really demonstrates this mainstream paradigm is that of the circular flow, whereby society consists only really of two segments: the household and the businesses. The households are the owners of the means of production: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship was added only over the past 50 or 60 years, essentially really to account for economic profits, because in the fundamental economy that is based on perfect competition, there is no such thing as economic profit. The perfect competitor always breaks even. But obviously, in a society such as ours, we have a substantial sum of economic profit, and we've got to find an agent that deserves it, so to speak. So we're not going to give it to labor, we're not going to give it to land, we're not going to give it to capital. So we had to come up with the idea of entrepreneurship. And this essentially is one of the simple reasons why entrepreneurship seems to be connected with the United States more than any other country in the world up till now. But notice also another thing that's really important is that there is no government. You're speaking about a society that is totally based on that idea of laissez-faire and the concept that the government that governs best is the government that governs least. Which leads obviously to very many problems, especially really when it comes to the idea of sustainability, as we've discussed before. Because if the market is going to fail, somebody has got to really come and interfere with the market in order to correct it. And the only person who can do that, or the only entity that can do that, obviously, is government. But that fundamental conception of economics really failed, in particular in the early 20s, and was replaced successfully, because every once in a while you have a challenge, but it really never succeeds. I mean, such as, for example, the Marxist challenge. It appeared for a while as if it was going to succeed, but then it seems to have fallen apart, because the world actually is probably even more capitalist right now than ever before. Actually, capitalism, for all practical purposes, is really universal. But what happened in the in the early 20th century, and to be precise, in 1936, Keynes wrote his masterpiece, his basic book, in which he rationalized for the first time a rather larger role for government, and not only that, but that of deficit finance. And ever since then, things have changed. They've never been the same before, been the same again. In a sense, to show you how important this is, try to relate it to the Tea Party. The Tea Party, really, it's nothing else but an effort to try and recreate the fundamental world that used to exist under Smith. But we're going through all of this in order really to say then ultimately that the consumer is driven, or society is driven, in order to by a certain dynamic in order to achieve a particular goal. So what is it driven by? Well, the basic definition of economics is that it is nothing else but the study of the allocation of resources in such a way as to maximize utility. And so the consumer is always trying to allocate the scarce resource. His basic scarce resource is income amongst all of the competing ends in such a way as to maximize utility. Now, what is it really that is utility? Utility is satisfaction, i.e. it's happiness. So the consumer is always trying to shun that which causes pain and go after that which will cause pleasure or happiness. So you have a certain money income and you allocate it amongst the different goods according, and the utility that you derive from these goods is again defined as increasing at a decreasing rate, i.e. the law of diminishing utility, which simply means, for those of you that might not have been introduced to the idea, is that if you're running a marathon, for example, and you are extremely thirsty at the end of the marathon, you're willing to pay, say, $15 for this first glass of water. You're still thirsty, you'll pay $10 for the second, and maybe $5 for the third. So your thirst is becoming quenched the more that you drink, but each successive glass of water means less to you, and so you're willing to pay less and less for it. And ultimately, you'll get to satiation whereby you might even run into negative utility, into disutility, because you don't want to drink any longer. So what does the consumer do? Well, the consumer, therefore, is going to try and allocate the resources amongst these goods in such a way as to get the same number of utils per the last dollar spent on each of these particular goods. Now, this very simple idea has a flaw, and the flaw is that what is a util? You've never seen a util, I've never seen a util, nobody has ever seen it, or touched it, or put it in a test tube, or weighed it, and so on and so forth. So we came up with the idea of using ordinal measures instead of cardinal measures. I.e., if you ask me what is the weight of a car, then I can tell you, for example, it is 3,640 pounds. But if you tell me who is prettier, A or B, well, I might choose A, another person might choose B. In that particular case, I can rank them. I say I prefer A to B or B to A, but I do not use any units. So that becomes ordinal. This is what we do in all of the beauty contests or in all of these county fairs when we go ahead and we decide that this jam deserves a blue ribbon and the other jam deserves a yellow ribbon, and so on and so forth. So the way out of it, therefore, is only through ranking, but we find out that the ultimate mathematical result is really essentially the same. Now, that is the idea of the indifference curves, and this is what is shown on that diagram on page 262. You have three different indifference curves, and instead of showing the budget line of one consumer, we're showing in this particular case the various combinations that are going to be available for that particular society. And so what is the highest level of satisfaction for that particular society? Well, it will be definitely that point whereby its highest level of indifference is barely touching the constraint that it has. And that is what's known essentially really as the Pareto optimality. So Pareto efficiency is defined essentially as you shouldn't take from Pete in order to give Paul. So if Pete is the present and Paul is the future, you don't want to take from the future in order to give to the present. And so as you can see, we're starting to creep into the notion of sustainability, because sustainability essentially really is best described as being nothing else but in that concept of intergenerational equity. Now, what else do you have to do? Well, you think that when you look at our society, we seem to think that the GDP is really can be used as a proxy. for the indifference curves. And so we try to reach the highest level of the GDP that is possible given the constraints that we have, i.e. the production possibility curve in that particular society. So if I give you, for example, a problem similar to saying that you have a reserve of oil of, say, 40,000 barrels, and you know the price in the present, and then you have to find out how is it that this is going to be allocated between the present period and the future period, or maybe even a 10-period model. And what you'll have to find out in each of these cases is that the future will not have to be shortchanged. Unfortunately, the mathematical solutions that is based on the mainstream economics will never fail. It will always show you that the allocations in the marketplace will violate this particular principle of Pareto optimality, i.e. the market can never ever guarantee an efficient solution that will meet this idea of sustainability. Does this mean, therefore, that the market solutions are not to be relied upon? No, we're not saying that. But what we're saying is that if you're going to rely totally on the market, you'll never have sustainability. But some people have come up with the idea of saying, okay, I can maintain sustainability if I rely on the market and use the allocation, but then set aside some of the revenue from the present period and give it to the future. And that's what they do, by the way, in Alaska and in Norway and in Kuwait and maybe certain other countries in the GCC. You set aside some of the revenue that is derived, for example, from oil, so that it will be passed along to the future generations, so that the future generation will not feel shortchanged. Now, there is a problem with this. I mean, it looks on the surface as if it really has resolved this particular paradox. And it does to some extent, but it doesn't really resolve the whole paradox. Because it is saying that yes, the future can be as better off as the present, provided that I can use or find certain substitutes for the goods, for the resources that I'm going to be abusing right now. And one can make the argument that historically we've found out that we can create substitutes for most of the goods that become scarce. I mean, a very simple idea, by the way, that's used very often by people who make this particular argument, is the fact that we don't need as much, for example, copper right now in order to have all of these telecommunication networks, because we've replaced them with fiber cable. And fiber cable does not require any of this scarce resource, and therefore we don't have to create as much damage to the planet Earth in order to go ahead and do this. But very many of the environmentalists, such as Daly, have come back and objected to this by saying, yes, it's true that you can, to some extent, go ahead and replace one manufactured capital with another manufactured capital. And in that case, you call it weak sustainability. But you will never be able to replace natural capital with manufactured capital. That's to say, if you run out of, say, water, if you increase the concentration of carbon dioxide to 400 or 500 parts per million, and so on and so forth, then all the manufactured capital in the world will do you no good, because you need to eat and you need to breathe and you need to carry on and you need to irrigate the crops and what have you. And so that is what has become known as strong sustainability. And so as you can see, one can argue, and this is what most of the people that are in the mainstream will argue, is that yes, you can go ahead and introduce certain rules and regulations that will transform the fundamental market solution into becoming sustainable, into not violating the basic principle of efficiency a la Pareto. But even then, however, you'll find out that they have no answer for the idea of what is it that needs to be done in order to deal with the scarcities that are developed as a result of the economic activities in the field of natural capital. And so ultimately what we're saying is that we shouldn't be able to run any level of economic activity that is going to eat into natural capital. So with that, we'll talk a little bit more about this next week. Yeah, bye-bye.